What is the creepiest glitch in the Matrix you've ever experienced? I mentioned this in another thread, but here it is again. Me and my friend were at a Chinese restaurant and we ordered a General Tso chicken dinner and a shrimp lo mein dish. When we sat down, we took out both boxes and set them on the table about 2 feet apart. My friend opens the first box and we see a shrimp lo mein dish. It has all the things in there: noodles, shrimp, fried rice. He closes the box and opens the other box. Inside that box is another shrimp lo mein dish: shrimp, noodles, fried rice. Oh, I think they must have mixed the order. I was just about to say this when my friend says out loud, "Looks like they made a mistake and gave us 2," as he opens up the first box again. Inside of it is a General Tso chicken dinner: General Tso chicken, white rice, and an egg roll. He froze and looked at me. I looked at him, and we sat in silence. It took us 5 or so minutes to collect ourselves. I have no idea what the F happened. 10 years ago, I was returning home from a road trip with 2 friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later, we came around a bend. It was a full moon and we could see the reflection from a lake below us, and other than that, the road was completely empty. Suddenly, everything went completely dark in the car. No lights from the dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about a quarter mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar though. After about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it just had an hour before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided that the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time, turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges, and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were 1 hour late. I was missing an hour of my life, and to this day, I have no idea how it happened. When I was a teenager, I had 2 really intense dreams one night. The first one was about an online friend of mine calling me to say she'd broken up with her boyfriend, and I sang a few lines of Seal's "Don't Cry" to her over the phone. The second dream was finding a real-life friend dead body floating in her bathtub. I didn't think anything of it up until I logged online that evening and the online friend came online to tell me her boyfriend broke up with her. I immediately asked if I could call her, and she said no. I remember thinking that it meant something, like I could change it. Not long after, my phone rang and it was real-life friend from the dream calling me. I was completely freaked out at this point, but talked to her normally. She said she was talking about school and shit, up until I realized I heard a splash in the background. I asked her, "Are you in the tub?" And when she said yes, I felt like my heart had stopped. I asked her, "What did you do?" She didn't answer me right away, and then after a very long pause, she told me she'd taken an entire bottle of pills and chased it with mushrooms and vodka. She'd gotten scared waiting for it to hit her, so she called me so she'd hear someone's voice. I hung up and called 911. By the time they got there, she was unconscious but alive. Today, she's a mom to a beautiful little girl, and she's okay. I have a sleep tracking app on my phone that has a setting for lucid dreaming. It will start saying, "You are dreaming," repeatedly in a woman's voice with a bit of an echo. I was at work one day when I started hearing the voice randomly every few minutes or so. I checked my phone, and as soon as the screen turned on, I woke up in my bed as the sun was rising. A bit freaked out, I went to take a shower. Then, on my way to work, I started to hear the voice again through the radio. When I turned my car off, a bit freaked out again, I once more woke up in the bed as the sun was rising. This happened about 3 or 4 more times, all at different times of the day. I didn't trust reality for about a week after that and still refused to use that particular setting of the app. I got a call from a police officer telling me if I didn't pay some old fines within a week, he would come arrest me. The total was $267.63. It was about 2 weeks before Christmas, so I was really sweating it. The very next day, I got a check in the mail for $267.63 for overpaid child support throughout the year. Craziest, most unexplainable thing I've ever had happen to me. Was looking at the giant poster of Jordan on my wall, considering if I should take it down. Turned the channel, and the person on TV said, "Jordan's gotta go." It was a show about the country. Took the poster down. It happened in early 2000 when I was working at a juvenile detention center in a small town in Oklahoma as a corrections officer. I was working nights at the time and went to work at 9 p.m. This one night when I arrived for work, my supervisor looked confused and asked me what I was doing there. I said, "I work tonight," and he said, "But they said you called in a few hours ago saying that you were sick." I was a bit confused and said, "It must have been someone else and they got the message wrong." After everyone showed up for work that night, it was a bit more weird, but we carried on as usual and assigned everyone their places for the night. I went to work in the control room where I usually work. The control room is the center of the prison that has direct control over the cameras, doors, phones, and everything. After I relieved the guard on duty and settled in for the night, I looked at the message that said I called in. It said that I had called at 6:50 and said that I had gotten sick while out cleaning up after the storm. There had been a storm the night before and it was a bit bad, but not anything that I had to go out to clean up. It was truly weird. The supervisor came into the control room about that time. He was also a friend of mine outside work and we started talking about it and how odd it was. I decided to call my wife at home and tell her about it while he was still sitting there. I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings, a man picked up the phone with a raspy voice and said, "Hello?" I did not know what to say for a few seconds. I looked at the phone to make sure I dialed the right number, and I had. After a few seconds, the person said, "Hello?" again in the same raspy voice. I said, "Hello, who is this?" "This is Taylor. Who is this?" the person said. My head started spinning because my name is Taylor also. I said in almost a scream, "Where is Ann?" He said, "Ann's in bed. Who is this?" I dropped the phone and told my supervisor to ring me out. I had to get home, and I took off towards the door. I could hear Dave pick up the phone behind me and say, "Hello?" followed soon after, "What the F?" rather loudly. I ran to my car and drove home faster than what was legal, my mind racing the entire time. I busted through the door. My wife was sitting watching TV and was shocked at me being home. I asked her who was there, and she said no one has been there. After a rather long talk with my wife, I went to call the prison to tell them what was going on, but the phone was dead. I went back to work, and when I came in, Dave was acting weird and asking me, "How the hell are you doing this?" He told me that when I left, I picked up the phone and the person on the other end sounded like me. He kind of freaked out and hung up the phone. A minute later, as he could see my car leaving the parking lot, I had called back from home and asked what the F was going on. He said that I was a bit irate and said I was sick and did not feel like playing these games and was telling him to stop prank calling me and hung up. After convincing him I had no idea what was going on, we went back to work. Later, I find out that my phone line for my area has been knocked down the night before by the storm. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. This happened when I was 11. I still remember it like it was yesterday. My grandfather was getting old and had been in and out of the hospital a few times that year. At that moment, he had been in the hospital for probably 2 days. We had gone into the hospital to visit him when I gave him a big hug and told him I loved him and would see him tomorrow. That night, I went to bed and had the most beautiful dream. My grandpa came into my room and sat in the rocking chair in the corner. He invited me into his lap and told me he was going away for a while and that someday he would see me again. I shouldn't worry because everything was okay and he wasn't in any pain. I smiled at him and gave him a big hug and told him I understood. And then I looked over at my brother sleeping in the bunk below me and asked my grandpa if we should wake him up and tell him. When I turned back around to get a response from my grandpa, he was gone. I ran to the window to look out onto the front yard. There he was, waving at me. He whispered, "Go tell your mom and dad exactly what I told you." I looked back at the door to my room and then back at the front yard and he was gone. I immediately woke up, ran to my parents' room and turned on the light. I told them exactly what Grandpa had told me. They told me it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I told them exactly what Grandpa told me. Again, frustrated, it was 2 a.m. Told me to go to bed and we would talk about it in the morning. Just then the phone rang. It was the hospital. My mother started sobbing. Grandpa had passed. At that moment, she just sat there with my father staring at me. I still remember their faces. They both looked at each other, then me, then each other, and finally smiled and stopped crying. They gave me a big hug and told me they loved me and to go back to bed. They ended up going to the hospital that night and my aunt came over to watch us. But we had never talked about that night since. In fact, I don't think I've ever written about it, which explains the tears rolling down my cheeks right now. Wow, that was liberating. And I'm glad other people had these types of things happen. During a spinal tap procedure I was put under, while under the anesthetics, I had what I can only explain as an out-of-body experience, seeing as how my viewpoint was above my body looking down on the procedure. I watched the whole thing and saw that the doctor knocked my Game Boy off the tabletop while walking by, batteries ejecting from the fall. One fell in sight and he picked it up, but the other was next to the front left wheel under the bed out of his view, but not mine. I woke up groggy and told him where my other battery was and he was shocked when he found it there. To this day, it still weirds me out. When I was like 10 or 11, I was going to the beach with my aunt and her friends. There were 2 cars of us. To get there, we had to go through a very large industrial area. We didn't know the direction, so our car was following the other. Suddenly, they did an unexpected turn, and so our driver had to take a sharp bend. In that moment, we heard a very clear, loud voice inside the car saying, laughing, "Sharp bend, The driver immediately hit the brakes. We looked at each other, puzzled. We all recognized it as a voice not belonging to any of us. In the very same time, we noticed that the other car had stopped as well. The other driver got out of the car with a scared face and shouted to us, Did you hear that as well?" They heard the very same thing inside their car. The area around was fully deserted. As I type this, I am already feeling deja vu. I always wanted to share this part of my life with someone, but have never been able to. So I'll just tell a bunch of people on the internet. One day I was walking to work and all of a sudden had an urge to walk a different path than usual. I work downtown in a big city. It was a strange spur-of-the-moment urge to walk a different way that changed my life forever. I turned into an alley I'd never seen before. As I remember it, I made it about 15 feet or so when an actual glitch happened. Everything in my mind scrambled. I felt like I didn't have a body anymore, just that I was a semi-conscious entity floating through some weird dimension. All of a sudden, in the array of different colors and shapes, a vision came to me. It was a bunch of strange-looking people that in my mind resembled businessmen in suits. They looked startled and panicked that I could see them. One of the people made a quick movement and everything turned to black. When I regained normality, I was on a completely different street. It was the same street that I always used to walk to work. I felt sick and severely disturbed or depressed. I've never done any hard drugs, never experienced any hallucinations, never have had anything like this happen to me. The weird thing is, when the glitch was correcting itself and I could see those people watching me, like a caged animal, I had the feeling that I knew I was being controlled. It still bothers me very much to this day. TLDR had a moment of spontaneity, caused a real-life glitch. Life has seemed different ever since. Back when I was in 5th grade, I remember sitting in class about to take an exam. It was one of those where the teacher would write down the question and we would all write down the answer on our sheet. After about the 3rd question, I started to realize that I had already seen these questions in the same order and knew the answers. I honestly remember it being like Groundhog Day, where I had this deja vu moment like I had already sat through the test the previous day. I raised my hand and said we had already done these questions, and I got this dumbfounded look from the teacher and classmates. I looked around like, seriously, I'm the only one realizing this? Oh really? The teacher says. What's the next answer? I went up and wrote the next several answers that just came to my head. He looked down at his test, verified the board, and canceled the test. Spent the rest of the afternoon with the teacher and principal being accused of compromising the test. The principal had him go through all his notes and lesson plans to see if he had briefed the test by accident in the past. They asked the other kids, nobody else remembered. They all scored shitty on the test. About a year ago, I had a terrible nightmare. It started off me waking up in bed during a thunderstorm. As the room illuminated again and again from the flashes of lightning outside, I realized that the bed I was lying in wasn't mine. The head of the bed was against the wall the door was located on, and from my perspective, I couldn't tell if it was open or closed. That is until I saw the face. At first, just the nose and jaw broke past the door frame, but then an entire face slowly passed through the doorway. I tried to yell, "Who the F are you? Who the F am I?" But it felt like I had lost my voice. No matter how hard I tried to scream, nothing came out and this person continued to enter the room, looking dead ahead away from me. Then, just as the person was completely into the room, their head snapped towards me and it locked eyes with mine. I tried to get out of the bed but felt completely paralyzed. The person started making their way to me, but with every step their body contort in ways that would break a normal person's bones. Their neck snapped so the back of their head touched their back. Their jaw lay flat on their chest. Their arms had broken at the shoulders and migrated to their back like wings. Just terrifying shit. And just before they reached me, I woke up. The next day I told my mom about it and went into great detail about the room. Turns out it was almost an exact copy of my room when I was a baby. We moved out of that room when I was super young, like I have no idea what the insides to any room looked like. Just kind of weird, I guess. Edit. So I guess I have sleep paralysis. Cool. A little backstory. I was a total idealist back in high school, so when choosing a college, I chose to go somewhere that none of my friends were attending so that I could strike out on my own in a finding myself sort of way. Well, I ended up making a few really close friends my first semester. I mean, these guys became like family to me in a matter of months. One day during winter break, one of those guys, my buddy Kimbo, had gone back home to visit friends and family, and on his return trip to our college, he hit a bad patch of ice and got into a car accident and was killed. It hurt like a son of a bitch for a long time, and I still think about him all the time. But anyways, a few weeks later after Kimbo's accident, me and the rest of the guys were getting back from a party off campus, and as we were standing outside our dorm building smoking a cig, I felt my phone vibrating, and when I pulled it out, I saw that I was getting a call from Kimbo's phone. Dumbfounded, I showed my friends the phone quickly and then answered. When I picked up, it just went directly to his voicemail, which played the same message it always had. It never happened again, and we never really talked about it, but for me, it was one of those someone's looking after me moments. I hadn't been doing very well after his death, but seeing his name show up on my cell phone screen one final time made me feel a whole lot better for a time and really helped me get out of the slump I was in. I have no idea how his phone could have possibly called me, and I doubt I ever will, but this was one glitch in the Matrix that I'll forever be thankful for. Rest in peace, Kim, but feel free to call again. One day I decided to go to another city with my dog. Her name is Daisy. After we had a good time, we were returning back through the city to the railway station. We were walking along a narrow street when at one moment an elderly lady looks out from the second floor window and says to my dog, "Daisy, hey Daisy." She repeated this a few more times and left. She just at one moment looked out of the window exactly at the moment when I was passing there and began to call my dog by her name, although during the trip I did not say the name of the dog. It was very strange. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, press the like button, and write in the comments what glitches in the Matrix you experienced.